Welcome to the show. My name is Chad, and joining me today is nationally syndicated cartoonist and New York Times bestselling graphic novelist Maria Scrivan, who has a new graphic novel coming out, not Nat A Chance, coming out in March, and she's here to talk a little bit about herself and about the book. So let me bring her in, and we'll find out about her and her book.
Hi, Chad.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me today.
Are you, is it cold where you are and are you staying warm?
I will go running. It was 12 degrees and I went running anyway. And running in the snow is just like running in the sand, except it's a lot colder. But yeah, I have friends who went early this morning when it was -10 and I did not. I think my limit is 0. But
Yeah.
I've lived in Connecticut my whole life. It's the only way I can get through the winter is to be able to be outside a little bit.
Yeah, I'm originally from West Virginia, and all my, I have friends and family down there who are like, "Oh, it's so cold." It's like we just call this mid-January.
Right. Yeah. I have a friend in Orlando who's like, oh, it's freezing. I'm like, what is it? She's like 59. I'm like, yeah, well, no, it's a winter. It's all right. I'm used to it.
Yeah. So, before we get talking about the book, tell me a little bit about yourself, as a creator and as a reader of cartoons, or if you are into comic books, that.
So growing up, I was hugely into comic strips and read the Sunday funnies start to finish. Every single one when I was a little kid, even ones that I didn't totally understand, like at the time, Brenda Starr, like I understood it, but it didn't really mean anything to me. And like, because it was more of an adult comic. And I loved Garfield books growing up. And I loved Bloom County. I loved Calvin and Hobbes. So I've always been more of a comic strip uh,
Mhm.
person more than a comic book person. And I'm so grateful. When I was growing up, we didn't really have graphic novels. And I'm so grateful for this medium because I've always been a visual communicator and visual learner. So it's absolutely the perfect medium for me to get my point across, which is great.
So, what inspired you to, become a cartoonist?
It was something I wanted to do my entire life. And especially as a little kid, when I was reading Garfield, I read every book that came out. And because the main character was a cartoonist and I was studying these books, I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. And what I didn't know then was that Jim Davis blurbed my book, The Creative of Garfield. I wish I had a time machine to go back to my 10-year-old self and say, you're never going to believe this. Like, you're actually going to have a syndicated comic in books and you're going to get a blurb from The Creative Garfield. So it was something I always wanted to do. And it's funny because a lot of the times in art, people say, I want to be an artist. Oh, well, you need something to fall back on. Cartooning was always my fallback. So in school, anytime a teacher gave us an assignment, I would do a cartoon because it would get me an A. So it was my fallback. It was what I always wanted to do. I would write notes to friends as a cartoon character. I made greeting cards for friends. It was my favorite and best way to communicate, and something that I always wanted to do my entire life. I took a windy path to get where I am now. I had a graphic design business. I tried a bunch of different things, but ultimately all I ever wanted to do was be a cartoonist.
So, tell me a little bit about your series. I guess you're getting ready to launch the ninth book,
Sixth, sixth
sixth. Okay.
coming up. Yeah, Natty Chance is the sixth, and it's all pretty quick because the first one came out in April of 2020. So yeah, 6 books in 5 years. So Nat is based on my childhood self. And when I first started writing Nat, they were vignettes from childhood that I wanted to sort of look at through the lens of humor. Because as we all know, middle school can be sort of a traumatic time. But some of those things now feel funny. They were not funny at the time. So I started out writing vignettes, and I really thought it was going to be kind of a prose book with spot illustrations, kind of like a Wimpy Kid type thing. And then I heard Mimi Pond speak at Crossroads Columbus about her graphic novel. And I was like, of course, this has to be a graphic novel. And then once I knew that, it all really came together. So the first 2 books came out both in 2020. And Nat is based on my childhood self, but it's really interesting because she completely took on a life of her own. And I'll bring even challenges from adulthood into the book. So, for instance, in the 4th book, Nat for Nothing, she deals with self doubt, and I have her confront these creatures I'm calling doubt gremlins. And these were the same feelings I had while I was writing the book. And that was by far my hardest book. I kept writing it over and over again. I inked the whole book, 235 pages, and then re-inked the whole book. So it was kind of perfect. So I take a lot of themes, things that I'm personally struggling with. So when I was younger, it was not fitting in, not thinking I was enough, not, feeling like I knew what I wanted to do with my life, and kind of bring in those themes. And also things like moving through doubt and fear. And I get a lot of feedback from parents that the books have really helped their kids move through anxiety and fear, which is so amazing to me to hear that.
Well, I have a 8-year-old son, and I know that I think this is, something that he's going to enjoy because, he does deal with a lot of that. Plus, he's currently big into like Dog Man and Captain Underpants.
Cool.
So,
Yeah.
um, I mean, it's interesting to, you know, that you're able to, take your childhood experiences and translate them to the page for, to help possibly help others.
I really hope that's okay. And I get that feedback so much. And the other big part about it is they're all based in humor. So it's a way for me to sort of take heavy concepts like dealing with anxiety, but wrap it in humor in a way that it just feels more manageable. And when I go through the book, every time I go through a pass through the edits, my first thought is, how can I make this funnier? What can I do to this scene or this page or this character to make it funnier? And I have so much fun writing them because for me, it's always a surprise. I never know where the story is going to go. I always start out with an outline, which I always say is like a roadmap. I know where I'm going, but I never know what I'm going to see along the way. And that is so
Mhm.
fun for me to watch the story evolve and surprise me as I'm writing it. And I have so much fun just with what shows up.
So tell us a little bit about the main character who's uh, based off of your experiences, any of the other supporting characters that we meet along the way.
So, as I said, Natalie's based on my childhood self, and she did take on a life of her own. And Natalie basically can't get out of her own way. Her biggest bully is herself in the form of self criticism and self doubt. She's an only child. She's in her head a lot and constantly worrying about where she fits in, what other people are thinking. And in the sixth book, she is sure she's not an athlete. She's always getting picked last for gym. She's either on her face or in the nurse's office. And in this book, though that belief is challenged when she gets pushed into doing a triathlon with her best friend Zoe. And what I love about this book is it challenges the stories that we tell ourselves. So we all kind of have a story. I'm bad at math, or I can't sing, and I myself had that story. I am not an athlete when I was a kid. And it was just the story. And then as I got older, I challenged it and realized it was just a story. It wasn't true at all. So her best friend is Zoe. And what I like to say about Zoe is sort of this amalgam of all of my favorite people and dear friends sort of rolled into one. And the protagonist, Lily, is one of those friends that's completely unpredictable. Just when you think she might be actually being nice to you, she pulls out the rug from underneath you. So Lily's sort of a mix of all of those negative traits of people. Flo, the girl who has her hair in her face, I don't know where Flo came from, and I just adore her because she's always a surprise and a delight when she ends up on the page. She's very smart, very funny, and very wise, and she always gives Nat really great advice on how to get out of her own way. And she's always doing quirky stuff. So at one point, I had her get a sock puppet named Argyle. And although Argyle has polka dots, like nothing makes sense in Flo's world. And she's really fun to write for because I never know what direction she's going, but she's very true to herself. Millie has such huge opinion of herself and such amazing confidence. It's kind of the contrast of Nat. She always wears an M on her shirt. If you look very closely at her part in her hair, she has an M. So it's always about her sort of just her unwavering confidence. And then I won't list out every single other character, but she has a new friend, Luca, that showed up in Nat for Nothing, where she does a comics club. And each of the characters sort of brings a little bit of a different part of a personality to the story. And then, of course, the cat and treat, which are her pets, which open every single chapter of the book. So I can't help but write a panel comic. So every chapter opens up with a comic between Cat and Treat. And I think I've done 60 of them so far for every book, which has been really fun. And they're really a fun supporting character because they have their own conversations. And the treat is based on my dog Toby, who will not come when I call him ever. But if I say I have a treat, he comes running. And I always said I should have just named him Treat. So I did, but in the book.
Nice. I know on the preview page, one of the preview pages for sixth volume, it's a Nat learning, I guess, learning to run. Is that something as a runner, as we were talking about, that you kind of were able to, you know, your personal experience again, bring that to the page?
Yeah, so much so that there's a part where Nat hurts her knee. And I was doing a trail race, I think 2 years ago now, and the trail race was called a mild sprain. So I jumped over a log and was just following directions and sprained my knee. And it was such a bummer because I love running and I couldn't run for like, it took like 6 months. It was, it wasn't surgery, but soft tissue damage always takes a long time. But when it happened, I was sort of in the throes of writing this book about triathlon. I'm like, well, if this is going to happen, I'm going to use it in the story. So I did use a lot of my experience of starting to run, and when I did do any sports. I did volleyball in middle school and track, and was miserable at track. And actually, there's a whole scene in Nat for Nothing where she kind of just completely bails on the hurdles. That was a true story from myself as well. So I didn't do anything. And even in high school, I joined the soccer team, but I didn't want to run the mile warm up. So I quit. So for me personally, it was college when I joined the rowing team that kind of set off this lifelong love of sports. And then I joined running groups as an adult, and all of these people were doing seemingly impossible things, running marathons and doing Ironman triathlons. And it was kind of like, well, maybe I can try that too. And I feel like the best training I've ever had in my life for graphic novels was training for an Ironman, because it's really mental training. It's
Oh
an
yeah.
incredibly long day. It's a 2.4 mile swim, 112-mile bike ride, followed by a marathon. I still don't know how I did it. Now I kind of stick to trail running, and but that mental training really helped with graphic novels because it's incredible workload. They're amazing deadlines, and I'm so thrilled that I had that mental training. And it also, I think, when you do something that feels impossible to you, then other things that are seemingly impossible now are available. Like, I don't think I would have even, and the idea of community. So I probably wouldn't have done any of these things if I hadn't surrounded myself with other people who are doing them. Same with graphic novels. I have a lot of cartoonist and writer friends, and seeing other people do them, I'm like, well, maybe I could do that too. So that's a theme that definitely that shows up in Nat a Chance. Like, when you do something that feels impossible, it opens the door for other possibilities.
Yeah, when I first moved up to New York, I was in the gym, and I decided to start training for a sprint triathlon, and I'm a stronger swimmer than I am a biker or a runner, and
You're lucky. I'm
and
not.
I
That's
mean,
great.
I did a couple sprint triathlons, and then uh, we had our son, and so that kind of has taken the back seat. But I did do the swim for a relay with my brother and a friend, the Ironman over in Rhode Island, and I did the swim
Yeah,
part of it, and
cool.
that was fun. So,
That's great. Yeah, it's such a great community of people as well.
so ha- is is this a finite series that you're planning on doing, or is it something that you will try to do as long as it's being received and you have ideas for it?
Yeah, I definitely have more Nat stories to tell. So I'm not done yet, for sure.
So, let's get a little bit into your process. How do you work? Do you work digitally? Do you do a kind of a hybrid type thing?
Well, I do. So I do a hybrid. The first two books in the series, Nat, Nat Enough and Forget Me Nat, I drew both by hand and ink and painted them in watercolor. And they were my first graphic novels, and I wasn't clear on continuity and characters at that point. And I know there's a lot of wonderful watercolor graphic novels out there, but I realized for me it made more sense to go to digital color. So by the third one, I switched to digital color and then ended up inking digitally. I use Procreate to ink, and then I do all my coloring in Photoshop. It's just an easier process. But no matter what, I start on paper, and I realize that my process, I have a notebook that I fill with pages. Actually, I have one here, but I think it's going to change my height of my camera too much. I just take a binder, fill it with plastic sheets, and just start going. And what I love about that is I can easily swap pages around. I love the immediacy of pencil. And I also use little stickies to make notes for it myself as I read the book. And I really want to make a book. So once I have that, I scan it in and then make the book in InDesign. Because again, I want to see where the pages flow. I want to know where the jokes land. I want to know where the chapter openers are. But there's something magical about pencil and paper. And I did one book where I did all of the sketches on the iPad, which is quicker because then I'm just airdropping them and I don't have to scan them. But I love the whole pencil paper experience. So I like to keep some of it in my process. And when I'm writing, I prefer not to write I've spent so much time in my home studio that anytime I can get outside, I'm happier. So I like the notebook because I can bring that to a coffee shop. I bring it to the beach. I bring it to a picnic table in the summertime. I really like having the writing process sort of in a compact thing. I mean, I guess I can also do that with an iPad, but there's something about paper and, like I said, shuffling pages. I mean, this one I even like was cutting things out literally and pasting them old school on the paper. But there was something really magical about that. But then ultimately I end up going to digital for inking. I really love working by hand, but it does seem to be a little bit of a quicker process for me to ink digitally, and certainly color digitally as well.
And so, with everything that's involved in a graphic novel, about how long does it, take you? And have you, as you've done more, have you gotten quicker and or I found different tips that help you be more efficient?
You know what's so funny? Every book I've done, I figure out some efficiency on like the last page. And I'm like, oh, so I absolutely bring that to the next book. I'm always like, oh, I just made this so much simpler for myself. Yes, I think they are definitely got more efficient, but I would say the whole process, start to finish, takes about a year. So when I'm roughing out a story, it takes me about a month to 6 weeks. I'd say 6 weeks to 2 months for all the sketches. Then that'll go off to the editor. So then there'll be some time of like back and forth and changes. Inking, same thing, takes me about 2 months to ink and about the same for color. So the first year I did 2 in 1 year, which was an incredibly compressed schedule. But weirdly enough, I think it's somehow quicker to paint by hand than the computer. The only problem is cleanup ends up taking a lot more time, much more time. And then continuity takes an amazing amount of time because I don't know how it happens. Now I actually have a very, like, every chapter I have all the characters that are in it, what outfits they're wearing, and still I end up putting a different shirt on a character or different shoes on a character. I don't know how it happens. It's a thing. I've talked to other cartoonists about this. So the continuity thing, especially when I was working with watercolor, was very time consuming, using the clone tool to swap out colors and all that. So yeah, it's a big undertaking. It's a big undertaking when you have 235 pages. And then I remember the first couple books, I sort of was figuring out my system, and I'd be maybe 50 pages in and then the system would change and I'd have to sort of go back. So I feel like now I have, for the Nat books, a really solid system. I know, what the pages, how the lines look on the pages, like all of that type of stuff, what the characters look like, who they are, all that. That was a lot for the first book. But that really took a while to kind of figure out the world and even the system.
Now, besides Nat, are there any other characters? I know you talked about a few of them. Are there any other characters that kind of have, you know, become special to you? And I'm sure they're all special since they're your creations, but that maybe you'd like to explore in their own series if given the chance.
I had talked, I don't, I actually mentioned Flo already, but I would love to sort of do a spin-off series with Flo because she's so It's just so funny and wacky. And I also think it would be fun to do something with Cat and Tree because they have very clear personalities. So I think it would be really fun to see what their life looks like, outside of Nat. We get a little glimpse into it, but and also Walter the Spider. I should mention Walter the Spider in Absolutely Nat, which is a book where Nat goes off to summer camp. Flo sort of adopts everything, and she adopts this character, Walter the Spider. And I always draw Walter. It's just, a series of circles. He's just a round circle with two dots for circles and lines. And I always draw him at school visits because it's just a series of 5 circles and some lines. And I always say that it would be great to do a graphic novel with Walter as a character because I could probably draw the thing in a weekend. I think it would be such a funny character. He doesn't really say anything. He just, hangs out. But
Now, you mentioned that Jim Davis was a big inspiration. Are there any other cartoonists or cartoons that kind of have inspired your art style or writing?
yeah, for sure. I was a huge Snoopy and Peanuts fan, and Bugs Bunny. So those two were probably my favorite. I watched endless Bugs Bunny cartoons, especially Chuck Jones, who I think is brilliant. And what I love about Chuck Jones is the subtlety of his expressions. Just the tiniest little eyebrow move, and everything changes, which I love. And I loved the philosophy of Peanuts and the simplicity of the characters. They say so much with such simple and direct lines. So those were all major influences of mine growing up. And I loved Shel Silverstein because although I didn't have graphic novels, I had a lot of illustrated books. And one of my favorite Shel Silverstein books, which I still own my original copy, was Lafcadio the Lion. Was a lion who loved marshmallows. And when I found out he had a suit made of marshmallows, which melted when he ironed it, I was in. I was like, this is the best thing ever. And I reread it as an adult, and I realized it's a story about being true to yourself and being more of who you are, which is really some of the similar themes from that. So I don't know what I was drawn. I know as a kid I was drawn to the marshmallows, but I think I was also drawn to that deeper meaning.
What advice would you have for your younger self, having 6 volumes of your graphic novel under your belt? And I know we've talked about things that you've kind of learned in the process, but yeah, are there any like larger themes that you would tell a younger you, or what a younger you to know that you know now?
Yeah, I think each of the books are books that I wish I had growing up. So the first one's all about self-worth, and the second one's about self-love, and the third one is moving through fear, and then moving through doubt and independence, and then believing in yourself. And I think I've written these because they're all sort of letters to my younger self, saying that, to get out of my own way, to believe in myself, to stop putting myself down, to get out of self-doubt, all these scripts I had as a little kid, that it's been really amazing and such an incredible healing process. I think the whole reason I was drawn to write these books in the first place, horrible pun, but I wanted to write them for self-healing. And the fact that they're resonating with readers, and that readers are helping move through heavy feelings, but also laughing, is such the icing on the cake for me. But I know for me, it was something that I had to do for myself and really kind of tell myself these things. And like I said earlier, if I could have had a time machine and tell my younger self, hey, it's going to work out. Like, it's fine. Just keep drawing, keep writing, keep reading, keep having fun. It's going to work out. And I think the having fun element is the biggest part, because I do what I do because I love it. And whenever, there are definitely times where it feels hard, and it can feel overwhelming. But in the end, I absolutely am so grateful to do what I do. I love what I do. And I know that when I have fun, and when any creator has fun, that energy comes right off the page and you can see it right away.
So, as we kind of wrap up, is there anything else that you wanted to mention about the series, about your work, that maybe we didn't specifically cover?
Yeah, I think one thing that I just love about Nat is watching her evolution. And the more I get to know her as a character, it feels like an onion, the more layers that get peeled back. And I think there's just so much complexity, especially in that time of life, because you're figuring out who you are. And what your place is in the world. That's where I feel like there's so many stories to be told, because there's so many facets to that. And the more you get to know yourself, then it's sort of like as you go down that road, then you want to learn more and you keep evolving. So that's been a really interesting journey for me in 6 books, to watch her evolve as a character, even in how she's drawn. And that she looks very different. Like I feel like she's kind of now the style of her got dialed in between the first book and the most recent book. It's a really fun process to watch.
So, how about giving us a final pitch for the series and the this volume of the book, and where people can find you if you are on social media?
Okay, so yeah, so this Nat Enough series is completely filled with humor, based in reality, but all through Nat's lens. And she also has a sketchbook that reflects her feelings, which gives me sort of an opportunity to do another layer of depth in the story. And every book ends with a mini comic that is Nat's comic about a synopsis of the whole story. And Nat a Chance again is about the stories that we tell ourselves, which may not be true, and what happens when we challenge those false beliefs and push ourselves out of our comfort zone and surprise ourselves with what we are capable of doing. So social media, it's at Maria Scrivan, and it keeps changing. I don't know. Social media keeps shifting. I'm most consistent on Instagram and Facebook, and now Threads. Have a Blue Sky account. I haven't started doing anything with it yet. I'm also on let's see. I'm on YouTube. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, kind of, but not really. I sort of exist there,
Yeah.
but yeah, probably most reliably on Instagram. But I don't know what's it going to be tomorrow. I keep every time I turn around, something gives me a new one. So, but
Yep.
my handle will always be whatever comes up at Maria Scrivan. So, and
Okay.
mariascrivan.com. You can see all of my work, my comics, my greeting cards, my books there. So if you go to mariascrivan.com, that's a good hub for all of my work.
Nice. Well, Nat a Chance comes out on March 4th,
Yeah, it's
which
coming
is
up. I'm so excited.
little over a month. It's hard to
Yeah,
believe we're already more than halfway through January.
I thought it was just like New Year's Eve a minute ago, so I don't know what happened either.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time today to chat with us and tell us a bit about your book. And I think everybody should uh, check it out. I know I'm going to check it out and, you know, see, let my son, who sounds like he would benefit, from reading it, and it's in his wheelhouse. So I think,
Great.
I think,
And I get
I think you'll enjoy it.
great. I hope he does. And I get a lot of feedback. Don't be, people say, oh, boys don't want to read a book with a female protagonist. There are so many boys that love this series, and I'm so thrilled that's a story that's not true about the protagonist. So I hope he enjoys it. I had so much fun writing and drawing them. So
Well, it was fun chatting with you, and maybe for volume 12 or whatever. Oh, maybe not that long, but I would love to have you back and discuss, the ongoing evolution of yourself as a writer and Nat.
that sounds great. Thank you. I would love that.
All right. Thank you and have a good day.
Thanks, Chad.